Do you see this quilt hanging behind me? People comment about it frequently in the midst of Zoom calls. They talk about how beautiful it is, how striking the colors are, how the red and the black play off of each other, and how the yellow stars pop against the red fabric. Some people who've seen the quilt in person comment about how well it's constructed and quilted, and how much life and energy there is in the fabrics the quilter chose. And you know what? I agree with all of those comments. I love the colors. The stitching really is beautiful, and it shows the care and the level of craft of the quilter. And I'll tell you something else about this quilt. I made it. I'm the quilter. And of all the quilts I've made, of all the pieces I've quilted over the years, this quilt really is a beloved masterpiece. Now that may sound like prideful bragging or showing off a little bit to you. And I'll admit to you that those are not usually the very first words out of my mouth about this quilt, especially among people I don't know very well. But this evening, it seems good and right to take the psalmist's words seriously and rejoice in God's creation of me, and then in my creation of this quilt. Because the truth is, God created me with a mad kind of color sense and an ability to see a quilt in my head and then create it. And over the years, I honed my skills. I practiced stitching. I quilted with a group of incredibly fine quilters until I myself became a really good quilter. And I'm wondering what you're good at. I know Edie Wakefanen has mad organizational skills. And I know Susan Ironside throws a fierce cross punch as a kickboxer. And Nikki Mathis, Nikki is a deep and powerful truth teller. What are you good at? Let's fill up the chat tonight with all the things we're good at. I'm good at, and you fill in the blank. And we're going to wait for that. I'm good at, fill up the chat with that. What are you good at? Cat whispering. Stephen plays a mean guitar. Look at this. Baking. Punning. I have sisters who pun. Cooking and photography and singing. Listening, loving, tennis, go John. Sitting with the dying, more cooking. Snorkeling, me too, yes, I love that. Nerding, good at tarot. Laughing, telling stories. Sculpting, I love that. Somebody here is good at Zoom. Translating and humor and baking bread. Being a mom. So many good parents here tonight. Good at printmaking. Ooh, that sounds fun. Musical theater to hang scripture on. Oh, I want to hear a sermon doing that. Crafting and planting and translating. Just look at all the things we're good at. And imagine all of those good and great things began when God created our inmost parts, knitting us together in our mother's womb. In our reading today, The psalmist gives thanks for being marvelously made. I like Robert Alter's translation of that line. Fearsomely, I am set apart. Fearsomely, I am set apart. Set apart with particularity, authentic and genuine to my own self as an individual. Now, if you're having trouble claiming out loud something you're good at because you're worried about being prideful or egotistical, consider that it's not prideful if it's true. It's not prideful if it's true. Consider that humility is simply living the truth of what is, living the truth of who we are. A humble stance doesn't set us above or below our neighbor. A humble stance isn't self-deprecating, or on the other side, it also doesn't allow us to just bask in the privilege of knowledge or skill. To live with humility is simply to claim the full truth of who we are, the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly. Authenticity is the word we hear so much now to describe that sense of being fully who we are. And I've begun to wonder, as its use has become more and more common, if authenticity is just the secular language for humility. Both words speak to the unique truth of who we are as individuals. And in the church, we would say that unique truth of who we are created in the image of God. It's from that place of humility, of authenticity, that I hear the psalmist's prayer of gratitude for the wonderful works of God that we are, fearsomely set apart, marvelously made. And being fearsomely set apart means there is no one else like us, no one else like me, and no one else like each of you. Just like there is not another quilt in the world like the one hanging behind me. It's a quilt only I could make. And I can't even recreate it now. A lot of the fabrics are no longer available. But more than that, I can't recreate the very heart of this quilt. I pieced this quilt together over the course of a year as a gift for my mother, while she and I renewed and reworked our relationship, as sometimes needs to happen, especially between daughters and mothers. The quilt came back to me last year after my mother died, and I'm happy to have it here with me. That quilt holds prayers in every stitch, and tears and laughter and life among its threads. I can't recreate the heartbreak or the love that resides in that quilt, and neither can anyone else. Another quilter can make their own quilt. They might even copy the pattern and the color choices, but they cannot make my quilt. The same is true for us as preachers. No one else can preach your sermon. Let's just think about that. Thousands of preachers across the church are looking at the same texts every Sunday, and yet their sermons are vastly different. And we all know the reasons for that. We each have our own exegetical work and context, our own prayer, our own experience, our own sermon prep, our own voice. Those are different for every preacher. We are called to preach in particular contexts with our own minds, our own hearts, our own voice. We are called to preach the sermon only we can preach. God has created you in your inmost parts, knit you together in your mother's womb, and you are marvelously made, fearsomely set apart. I invite you to celebrate with all humility your true, authentic preaching self. Because when you do that, you are living the good news that is in you. And we have to be good news to preach good news. So preach the good news that is yours to preach.